Today on the Relationship Revival Show, I'm joined by Helen Fanucci. Helen is an MIT-trained engineer who has built her reputation and career managing teams responsible for billions of dollars of quota. She developed the Love Your Team system of sales management over a 25-year career on the front lines at top tech companies including Apple, Sun Microsystems, IBM, and Microsoft. Helen's first book, Love Your Team, A Survival Guide for Sales Managers in a Hybrid World, launched November 1st on Amazon. She also hosts the Love Your Team podcast, which focuses on retaining top talent and building high-performance teams. You're listening to the Relationship Revival podcast with John DeBach, also known as Mr. Spirituality. That's me. I'm your host, giving you insights and guidance from over 10 years in the field of this amazing journey we call romance. On this show, I go over everything you need to know about how to get into a relationship, how to get the most out of a relationship, and sometimes even how to gracefully end a relationship without pulling your hair out and going crazy. And occasionally, I'm even joined by new and old friends who are also relationship experts to bring you guidance and wisdom with new perspectives. Thanks for stopping by. Helen Fanucci, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
I am really excited to talk to you because you're not my typical guest. So I usually have therapists, psychiatrists. I usually have people who are in the dating space. But when I heard that the name of your system was Love Your Team, I kind of went, okay, what's going on here? And I think that the relationships are universal in many ways. Obviously there's no physical intimacy, but the idea of kind of coming together in the business world and the platonic world, in the romantic worlds, have a lot of parallels, or even parent to child. And so I'm curious to learn selfishly here from an expert on somebody who's built teams and built them in a sustainable way, what your system is and how you developed it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. I have to admit as well that this is not my typical podcast. And I was a little bit nervous because Love Your Team is not self-help. It's not therapy, which is why I intentionally put Love Your Team, A Survival Guide for Sales Managers in a Hybrid World as my book title, because I didn't want people to think it was self-help. But
Sure.
But back to your question. So business is all about relationships. And I've found over the years that I've been managing teams over 25 years remotely, in person, that if you don't build a strong relationship with your team members, you really can't go many places with them, so to speak. And what I mean by that is you have better results and outcomes and business results when you understand what matters to your team members on their terms and support them. And that might seem obvious, but so many managers today think, okay, well, I'm the boss, they should do what I say, or what have you. And that just doesn't cut it. And so my system is actually the 17 critical conversations that managers need to have with their team. Because when I reflected on what I do, I have conversations. And my first category of conversations are called conversations of connection. And those are 5 chapters about building a connection and a relationship with your team and understanding what matters to them. And that then creates a foundation that builds trust and enables you to do a lot of things, because inevitably circumstances change, strategies change, and you need to bring your team along with you. And so it's super foundational.
Well, give me an example of one. What is a conversation that you would start, a connection-based conversation with your sales team?
Okay, so the first conversation of connection is you're a brand new manager and you've taken on a new team. You're the boss. How do you introduce yourself to the team? And the reason I call that out is because I've been on the receiving end of managers who have no idea that that matters. It starts to set up the conversation, the relationship. So every chapter is, how to identify the need for the conversation, intended outcome, how to conduct the conversation, assessing if it worked. So what I do is I hold a team meeting, and then I outline, okay, first I tell people about myself. So I have PowerPoint slides, 3 slides. And the
I
first,
love that you said 3 slides and it's not like
no, it's
42,
three. The
by the way.
first, and
Yeah.
I lay it out. The first slide is, okay, about myself. All right, I have 2 kids. I'm married. I enjoy traveling to Italy, and I like, wine and pasta or whatever. Some things about myself, and then maybe it's a fun fact.
Yeah.
And my second,
Sounds like a fun profile to me so far. Wine and
yeah,
pasta. I'm in.
that's like also where I live, right?
Right.
And so then my second slide is my management approach and philosophy. So they know what to expect of me. And the whole orientation of why I put it together, and I'll go into what, is because this is about what's useful to them so they know how to interact with me and what matters. It's not about really me and how great I am.
Mm-hmm.
So my philosophy is, results orientation. So clarity of job and what's expected, clarity of expectations, people first, no surprises. Just I want to be given the opportunity to lean in and help. Culture matters. So those are those kinds of things, and I will talk about that and kind of give examples. And then the third slide is what's next. And what's next is a one-on-one conversation with me. I'll set it up. You don't need to prepare anything. I just want to get to know you. The second chapter is that first one-on-one conversation and kind of what I go through, or just what I want to learn from them, maybe some probing questions I might ask, like, it's really up to what they want to tell me about. And then the third chapter is my weekly or bi-weekly one-on-one cadence and how that's structured, because I have them create the agenda because I want to be helpful to them and empowering of them. It also helps me assess if they're on track or not. So those are 3 of the 5 chapters.
So you brought up it's interesting because there's a lot of one-on-ones. So realistically, what's the cap? Like if you have a sales team of 100, you're not going to be doing that. So what's like the sweet spot for that style?
Yeah, so I would say 12 to 15 direct reports maximum. And at 12 direct reports, my system, if you will, takes about 15% of a manager's time in a given month, assuming a 40-hour work week. If you have
Mm-hmm.
more than 12, you probably have managers that work for you.
Yeah, sure.
And so then you have, okay, that kind of conversations with your direct reports. And then quarterly, depending again how big your team is, then I'll have a skip level one-on-one. And if it's bigger, it depends and flexes with depending on how big the team is.
I'm going to veer off a little bit, but I have a question that, I'm blessed that I don't have a big team. I've kind of designed my business that way, but I call it blessed because it works for me. I mean, so I get to meet people this way. I know there are days where I wish I did have a team, a huge team, but I've heard this from a lot of my clients, and I've heard this from a lot of my peers, that it's increasingly more difficult to kind of keep millennials engaged and committed, and the sense of loyalty in the workforce has gone out the window. And I assume you have some thoughts on why, being that you've worked in this space for so long as a sales manager, and especially in the tech space, where I feel like people kind of change jobs almost like they change their socks sometimes in that world.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the first thing I would say is people leave their managers more often than they leave their companies. So
Yep.
I'm very intentional about finding out what matters to my team. And nowadays, in the pandemic showed us that we can work effectively remotely. So people expect flexibility of not only where they work, but when they work. They also want to be known as whole human beings with lives and ambitions that matter, not just sort of a work robot like might have been in the past. And I
Hmm.
know that that's uncomfortable to a lot of managers who are traditional, and it can feel like it's a little too touchy feely or something like that. I mean, I know some managers like are very kind of concerned about being too personal with people. But if you don't understand what matters to your individual, like, do they want to get promoted? Do they want flexibility? Do they have a child or children they need to drop off at 8 a.m. every morning to school, and so you don't want to have a staff meeting at that time? Now those things may seem like small things, but you're communicating that you matter. I've helped people get career advancements, etc. The millennials, I have millennials on my team, I have Gen Z's, and then I try to find out like what they care about, and it's usually creating opportunities to understand how business works and meet new people and be mentored. And you can't hold on to people, meaning if you hold on too tight, they're going to leave anyway. You've got to support them on their career trajectory, and you're a stop along their way, if you will, of their career. And
Hmm.
so I embrace that. I accept it. I help people get promoted. Then I become an attractor of talent because the reputation is that you're a good person to work with and you help actually people with their career goals and ambitions. I'm super chill with people who have kids at home. I was a single parent for 24 years, raising kids by
Wow.
myself with a full time job, and it is so hard.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I have 4 kids, and when my wife goes away to the market for 30 minutes, I have a panic attack. So
Well, I get you.
I'm exaggerating. I mean, but it's hard for sure. And if you have to do that and show up to an appointment, and then I think anybody who has kids has been on a Zoom where the kids are in the background, and you kind of have to add this disclaimer of you might hear someone.
But what's great about the pandemic is it normalized and humanized us. We know more about each other than we did before. And I think that's actually a really positive thing.
Yeah, that's the silver lining, is it kind
Yeah.
of made, I think the crumbling of the corporate facade is a good thing for America. It's like sometimes it's nice to realize that there's a person on the other end of that transaction, which is why I think I connected with your system, the idea that it's relationship based, keeping other people's goals in mind, and then figuring out how to support their goals. Now, let me ask you a question while we're on this idea of supporting their goals. Do you ever find that their goals are somewhat conflicting with what you would like out of them? And then how do you wrestle with that?
Well, there's fundamentals of the job. So, for example, sellers, there's achieving quota, there's building pipeline, there's, kind of that's the ante into the game of that job.
Sure.
If you don't want to do that, it's not
Not
the
the right
right
job
fit.
for you. Yeah.
And sometimes people are in a role, and then because of new ways of doing things, we're evolving as a business, the role changes out from under them, or they're still in the job, and it's not a good fit any longer. So how can I help people evolve and find that good fit job? So that absolutely happens. I would also say that in my experience, if it's not working for me, it's not working for them.
Hmm.
And, as Brene Brown says, clarity is kindness. And so
Yeah.
also having kind of a adult human conversation, like, hey, here's what I'm seeing, you know, it's usually behavior or what have you. How do you see it? and
Yeah.
really trying to understand what their point of view is and what's going on with them.
Look at you quoting Brene Brown, and you thought you weren't going to be at home on this podcast.
I love Brene. If there's one person in the world that I could have dinner with, it would be Brene.
Well, let's send the message out. I mean, come on. Let's make it happen, Helen.
Yeah.
I love that idea. How much of the one-on-one meeting has to kind of be balanced with creating this team culture in the company?
It's a really great question. The reality is, in most sales organizations, including mine, my sellers are on their own quota and have their own customers. So they're a team in name only. Now, if you take that my seller is the leader of I work for Microsoft, so it's a big cross-functional team. They're
Yeah.
a leader of a team. Nobody reports to my seller, but a cross-functional kind of dotted line team. They lead that team of like 35 to 50 people for large accounts. And they're expected to be able to create a culture across that team that's consistent with people wanting to work with them and feel valued and included and communication and all that kind of stuff. So where culture tends to show up is how we work across the organization. I'm, a large account sales leader. So Honeywell, Boeing, big companies are our customers. And it just takes a village really to mobilize the resources to deliver value to the customer. And when I said a few minutes ago about really wanting to understand what matters to my team on their terms, it's actually really the same skills that I expect that my sellers have to have with their customers, but also with the teams they manage. Because customers want, what they want on their terms.
Yeah.
So it's actually, I sometimes say my number one customer are my team members.
Yeah. So it's kind of a top down philosophy where they learn the interaction skills, if by nothing else, just by watching how you interact with them. And they can kind of pass those skill sets onto their customers. And then they build the relationships in a really healthy way to drive business.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. And I also try not to put my ego first. So, one of the things I do is I want to make sure my sellers are supported. I talked about that. Well, when they're doing a big presentation at a customer executive meeting, I'm in the background with my video off taking notes on actions because I want them to be running that show. So I know that might seem odd or weird that a manager is, taking notes on their behalf, but it enables me to debrief with them and also coach them, and it enables them to be present without worrying about action items, or they can focus on the conversation at hand.
Great. Um, was there a specific experience either at Microsoft or one of your other companies that really drove you and was the impetus of writing the book? Or was it kind of an amalgam of things that's happened over your career?
Honestly, it was twofold. One is I felt like I had something positive to say, and when I met my husband, we got married last July. When I met him
Oh, congratulations.
thank you. When I met him 4 years ago, he's like, and during COVID, he'd hear me talk. He'd say, you should write a book because what you do is really different. And I'm like, no, it's not that different. So he was really encouraging. The other thing is I had been on the receiving end of not so great leadership and management, and I was kind of irritated and pissed. And so there was some like, you know what?
Passive aggressive bone to pick by writing a book.
And I have heard that kind of fuels energy. And so I decided I was going to write a book. And so I have.
Well, it's probably one of the most uh, clear. Well, I don't. It's probably one of the healthiest forms of passive aggression I think you could have, where you're channeling this resentment you might have had for bad leaders and fueling new good leaders in the world by putting it all into this neat little package that people can get on Amazon.
Right.
So, bravo. It's better
Well,
than,
well said. Yeah.
it's better than keying somebody's car,
Oh, you know what? I've been in the tech world my whole career, which is a very long time. And, it's just you got to roll with things. And if you don't like what's happening, you can wait because usually things change, or you can navigate yourself into another role or another environment. And I'd much rather be in an organization with a great culture and leaders I respect. And um, there's a lot of jobs I can do, but that's a differentiator for me. That
Yeah.
matters more than the specifics of the job.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that the old aphorism of "you pick your boss, not your job," that really is, at least personally, what I found to be true. Let's looking at it from the employee side. Let's say you're on a sales team and you don't like your manager's communication style. You don't like how they're building the team. Have you found, because you've been on both ends, right? You've been in very large organizational structures where you didn't like your leaders. Have you found, other than writing a book about your complaints, a way to communicate with someone about how their style just isn't meshing with you? Or do you just kind of have to stomach it and roll with the punches and look for another position somewhere?
Well, I have spoken up and I have communicated where, something might not work. Or I said, I really feel like that was an inappropriate conversation, as an example. Because I
Uh-huh.
have, well, I don't want to say anything more right now, but
Sure, sure.
I've had inappropriate conversations that people had with me. And I just said, I'm uncomfortable with that. And I feel like that was inappropriate. And that,
Advocating for yourself, for sure. I think that's hugely important.
yeah, and then that caused the person to feel defensive and shared with me a bunch of things. And I realized in it was a gift, really, because in his communication to me, I realized, oh my goodness, he has all of these conversations about me that have really nothing to do with me, but it made me realize that we had a mismatch that was greater than I had realized. So I navigated myself to another role, because I also believe that I have to focus on what is in my control, and
Hmm.
changing others isn't in my control.
Yeah.
And he had positional authority over me, obviously. In other scenarios where, I've spoken up and I've said, hey, I I felt, shut down, and here's what I was trying to say, because that also happened. The manager on the receiving end of that was, oh, I didn't realize it. I didn't look at it that way. I see your point, and they were open to that conversation.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
it
Hmm.
it goes it goes both ways. And I think I've also been, well, I've been in the spot where I thought, am I putting who I am on the shelf for the sake of my job? And that's too high of a cost to pay.
Yeah.
So I'm not willing to do that anymore. And in the past, I probably have done it more than I should have.
I think that's probably typical of young employees. I hate saying it, but I think women tend to, be pushed into that position more so than men, where they kind of put their own identity at the door a little quicker than men. I'm glad to see it starting to change. I'm not saying that was, your situation, but from what I've seen from clients walking through my door as a counselor. So I think that's true. You have to kind of know what your boundaries and what your limits are, and that's a good place to start. The other thing I might suggest is buy a copy of Helen's book, Love Your Team. Just casually leave it around the office. Just casually have it, on a Zoom call, just like, oh, what's that you're reading? It's this fascinating book.
Yeah, and I will say, because I know some people feel uncomfortable with the L word in business. My view is love is an action. Love,
Yeah.
and it's about the actions of supporting, caring for your team, having empathy. And I first came up with it in July of 21 when I was giving a presentation on retaining your top talent. And what was authentic to me was to use the word love, even though I was nervous about using it in a business conference. But
Yeah.
I got a lot of great feedback, and so I went with it.
Well, I'll share with you something that I tell a lot of my clients. I was on track to be an Orthodox Jewish rabbi. It didn't take, but that's how I kind of started in this field, and I still have great ties with wonderful friends in that world. But whenever I tell people about the nature of love, if you look at the Hebrew root word of love, ahava, the root is hav, which means to give, with the idea of being generous in that action of love. And your system is based on that. What do you want? Where do you want your career? How can I support you? And
Right.
that is the foundation of any relationship. When you switch from being needy to needed, right? When you actually figure out how can I be of service to this person, that's when real relationships start to emerge and flourish. And I think more managers would be shocked by adopting that simple philosophy that you've seemed to really systematize in a way that's understandable in a non woo woo way. That's just, nuts and bolts business, but from a really positive standpoint. And I think it's more needed now than ever in this hybrid world of, remote locations, and really what is the nature of building those relationships that sustain a good team.
That's really lovely for you to say. That's well, that's great. Thank you for that. Yeah, and I'm an engineer by training, so maybe that's why it's systematized and broken down the way it is. But it's intended to be actionable and accessible and hopefully helpful.
I am very right brained. I am a very creative person. I don't like systems by nature, but what I found is that the systems work. When I started this, I thought, when I started having sessions, I'm like, I'm going to fly by the seat of my pants. But you know what? Structure is there for when you feel lost. And it's this map. And I have clung to structure. I mean, I use the Gottman method. I use some EFT training, and this stuff for me, like when I feel like, well, what's missing here? That system that I've now internalized, you learn it first cognitively, but then it just becomes part of your character. That is such a useful tool. Even in my own marriage, when things go wrong, I say, well, what would I tell a client? And then suddenly that sparks that part of the brain that's like, okay, well, let's look in the filing cabinet of conflict resolution, and what are the 4 steps? And suddenly it's like, oh, I get it. And now I can move forward. And I think systems are hugely useful for everybody. If you're left brain, you're already in love with them. If you're right brain, they are a crutch that you need to learn to utilize more. And I deal with a lot of artists being in the LA area, and when I start teaching them like the reason systems exist specifically for them, they find it liberating. So I'm a big fan. And don't ever call yourself just an engineer. I mean, I think people who develop systems are some of the most useful. I mean, how would you ever build anything without a system? You need the architecture, you need the planning. So you can always veer off and be Frank Gehry, but if you don't know how to make the building stand up, you can't make the walls curve,
So true. It's a foundation. It's foundational for me.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Helen Fanucci, I love what you're doing. I hope everybody reads your book. Love Your Team, loveyourteam.com. You can find the book there. It's also on Amazon. Be sure to reach out and let Helen know. I'm sure there's ways you can connect on her website. Drop her a line. If you know Brene Brown, let her know. Let her know how to get in touch with Helen. But yeah, seriously, read the book. If you're in a sales organization, it sounds like she has that forward thinking that's really going to connect with people of all ages in this new world we're navigating, where you really have to have a more holistic approach to sales and to your team and to growth in general. If you're interested in learning how to get the absolute most out of your romantic relationships, then you're in luck, because I have put together a free workshop or masterclass, if you will, about 3 secrets that people in happy relationships have discovered. You can view the workshop at mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. Again, it's completely free. Just go there and watch it. It'll help you on your journey, give you some wisdom, some things to think about. The website again is mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. That's mrspirituality.com/3, the word secrets. It's all yours. Enjoy.